you'll have to do that.
Right. Does it tell you all that I'm recording now?
Yep.
Excellent. Right. And back to the world. Okay. And right, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay.
No. Yes.
Okay. I'll click through the slides quite slowly. So essentially all I can see is the presentation view on the slides. I now can't see you guys or anything. So if you have a question, do feel free to tap it in the little queries box, and then Tina can capture the questions at the end, and
Okay.
hopefully
Yeah.
we can remember what they were about and answer them.
You'll be fine.
Excellent. So just for those of you that don't know, my name is Nick, and I've been in the Northumberland Bat Group for eons. Gosh, more than 10 years, more than 12 years probably about 14, 15 years now. And done a lot of work with them, and they've inspired me about bats, because actually when I joined I didn't really know much, and as my work's developed I've started to work overseas a lot, and I always take my fascination for the winged mammals with me. Has everyone got their microphones on mute, by the way? Great, thanks. So what I thought I would do is just give you all a brief talk about a couple of continents that I've visited, and the bat species that I've noted on those continents that have been particularly interesting to me, and to give you a few facts about them. Somebody's not on mute and I can hear lots of thumping, sorry. So what we're going to do is a quick look at the worldwide bat species, and then we're going to select a few species from 4 continents that have made an impression on me, and then I'll go into those species in a little bit more detail so we can learn some interesting facts about them. So in the world there are over 14,000 species of bat. Bats are mammals that are in the order Chiroptera, and basically they are bats because they've got 4 limbs adapted as wings, and they're the only mammals capable of true and sustained flight. So you've got the flying squirrels that can jump off a tree and glide, but they can't then flap back up again. Bats can actually fly properly. They've got very varied diets. They'll eat insects. You've got types that eat nectar, fruit, and even frogs, and we'll learn about some of them later. With some bats hibernate, some bats migrate, some bats don't need to do either. Just depends where they live and generally food availability. Bats will vary very much in size, from the Kitti's hognose bat, which weighs about 2 grams. It's an absolutely tiny bat, and it lives in the little vegetated islands that you get in the middle of the agricultural fields in Thailand and Myanmar. And sometimes between those little islands, you've actually got a difference in genetics between the small bats. So they don't go very far when they forage, which essentially means they're highly threatened as well. And then you've got the biggest bats, the flying fox, which I'll talk about later, because I had some joyful times with flying foxes in Sri Lanka last year, or year before last. Yeah, last year, I think. We'll just forget happened, shall we? And then bats can be very long lived, up to 41 years. I think some of you might have seen video footage of the 38-year-old fruit bat that the lady took flying around her house, balanced on her arm each morning, and then let it eat cut up fruit from a box. So moving on, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about North American bats, because they're not in my chosen few, but they just give a really good flavour for the real adaptations that bats have got. So first one is the California leaf-nosed bat, Macrotis californicus. It's got very, very large ears and leaf-like projections on its nose, and it's actually a gleaning bat, like our brown long-eared bats are. It doesn't need to migrate or hibernate because it lives in a warm enough area and always has food availability. And the wings are kind of quite short and broad, so it can't actually fly long distances. And it can live in desert habitats as well. The next one is the Mexican long-tongued bat. I can't pronounce its Latin name. I could have a go. Chionapteris mexicana. And the species has got a very elongated nose. It's about 5 millimeters long, with a leaf. So the leaf on the end is about 5 millimeters long. It's got a tongue that's very extendable, so it can stick it right down into the flower. And the tongue's got little hair-like papillae on, which then trap the pollen and pull it back out, so it can have pollen and nectar from the flowers. It's very, very important for pollination as well. The next one is the lesser long-nosed bat. They're funny names, these, aren't they? The tongue of this bat's got a number of adaptations for particularly lapping nectar up. And it's got long ridges and it's quite rough. And so the nectar gets caught, and when it pulls it out the flower, it's still got the nectar stuck to its tongue, which it can then suck off and swallow. It's quite energy efficient, and it can actually fly quite long distances as well. And they are very, very important, these guys, for pollinating night blooming plants such as saguaro cactus, organpipe cactus, and also for agaves. So if any of you are into, what's that drink called? Can't remember the name now. Tequila. Then this is a bat you should be nice to. And then we've got I rather like this bat, partly because it was a bit of a cool color, and it just looks so fluffy and warm. And you'd have thought it'd come from a really northern extremity, sort of Canada, but far from it. It's actually from Hawaii. It's an insectivorous bat, and it does use echolocation for foraging and hunting. But what's really interesting about it is how on earth did it get to Hawaii? That is a hell of a long commute out over that ocean. So whichever way it arrived on the island, it did, and they don't think man had anything to do with it. It was quite an interesting bat to think about. And finally, my absolute favorite. This is a spotted bat, Euderma maculatum, as in spots. And it's got these huge ears. So it is a whispering bat, again, a bit like our brown long-eared bat. But it's a black bat with 2 white spots on its shoulders and a white spot on its front as well. Its ears tend to be rolled up when it's resting, not just hibernating, but also when it's resting. And when it becomes active, it pumps blood into its ears and they go bing and they stick up, which I just think looks really cool when they do it. It's quite a solitary bat, and it's quite territorial. But the thing about it and how you can often hear it is its echolocation is quite low. I think it's about 12 to 16, or part of the call is 12 to 16. And so you can actually hear it. Okay, so when putting this talk together, I was like, how am I going to do bat diversity? What shall I base it on? So I've actually gone for my favorite topic, which is food. So we're just going to look at a different array of bats based on what they actually eat. So I've picked some that eat insects, some that's nectar, and so on and so forth. Because bats actually pollinate about 500 plant species. So our fruit bats are actually really, really valuable, including mango, banana, durian, guava, agave. So quite a useful bat to have. Don't know how it's appeared to you, but the top left picture here is agave, which is like the big spiky cactus, or mother-in-law's tongues, as I've always called it. And then there's various other things on there that bats eat. Okay, so what I've done is I've selected 6 countries on 5 continents just to talk about bats. For Asia, I've selected Malaysia and Sri Lanka. For Europe, I've gone with Georgia. Africa, I've gone with Guinea. North America, well, you already had those short slides, so I'm not going to talk about North America anymore. And South America, I've selected Argentina. So we'll kick off straight away into Gumantong Caves in Borneo, Malaysia. So Malaysia's got the whole of the orange area on that map, which is Peninsular Malaysia and what they call Borneo, Malaysia as well. And on Borneo, there are some very famous caves made famous by BBC and David Attenborough, called the Gumantong Caves, which I had the joy of visiting and experiencing all the bats. And I found this bat on the floor, which was quite sad, but it was still alive. And at the time, gosh, this must have been about 12 years ago, I don't think we were so worried about diseases from bats. So I picked it up to take a photo of it. And it had been on the floor and it was looking pretty miserable. And what I hadn't realized was that anything that lands on the floor is not only in about 20 meters deep guano, but they will immediately start being eaten by beetles, millipedes, and cockroaches, as that picture shows of a poor dead bat being munched away. And the other thing the bats are susceptible to is something called a racer snake. And this snake defies gravity by moving as fast as possible up the cave wall, grabbing the bat it's going to eat, falling off the cave wall onto the soft guano-laden floor, and then having its meal slowly digest while it slithers around the base of the cave. So this poor old bat that I picked up that was only just alive probably wasn't going to be alive for much longer. But what's interesting about it is, unlike most of our UK bat species, you can see it's got a very, very long, free tail sticking out, which is quite cool. It was the first one I'd seen up close like that. And then you get the true facial picture and you can see why it's called a wrinkle-lipped bat. I think it's quite beautiful, but some people might not say that. It's got long, narrow wings, so it's got a fast flight, but not necessarily an agile flight, although the video I'm going to show you, I think, shows it being pretty agile. It echolocates between about 32 and 47 kilohertz, so again, it kind of hits that sweet note between 40 and 45 that most bats seem to. It's actually found across most of Asia, most of Southern Asia, so it's not protected. It's not vulnerable, but I just thought it was quite a cool bat to pick up. It eats beetles and moths, and it does roost with other species. There's a few other species that live in the cave system with it. There's a horseshoe bat, and there is a I can't remember what the other bat is. There's 3 of them living in that cave. It mates in autumn and winter and gives birth in May, so not too dissimilar really to our bats in the UK. So what I'm going to do is show you a short video which I didn't take, and I hope it works on your screens. It's about 2 minutes long. I'll just play it till the end and then stop it. But when I was there, I did witness the bats exiting the cave, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So I'll play you a video that someone else took of the bats exiting the cave, and hopefully it'll play properly. And hopefully you'll have sound as well. There's birds of prey, and they're hoping to pick off the individual bats, which becomes increasingly difficult when they fly in formations like this. I hope that wasn't too jumpy on people's screens, but I'll set a link and put it on the website, but I just find it quite relaxing watching the bats flying around like that. So the next place I looked at bats, well, not really in chronological order, but the next place we're moving to is Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is really just not attached to India, but there is a very thin isthmus. And what this means is that for the flying species, like bats and birds, Sri Lanka doesn't have quite so many endemics. But for the terrestrial species that can't move across that isthmus, Sri Lanka does have a lot of endemic species. It does have an awful lot of bats, and so I was quite excited when I got my first job out here, although it was nothing to do with bats, but did take a week to go and look for my favourite mammals. So first place I visited was a place called Popham Arboretum. It was set up by a chap called Sam Popham, who's a British guy, and he basically wanted to preserve some of the dry zone. Dry zone is used particularly by Sri Lankan farmers for growing crops because it's incredibly fertile. And so what he did was he took about 7.5 acres, which isn't much at all, of thorny scrub, and he fenced round it, and he paid people not to come on it, and it's regenerated into quite a nice bit of jungle, really. And you can walk around it, and it's got many species of bats, but it's particularly famous. Most people go actually for the grey slender loris with its huge eyes. It's near threatened on the IUCN Red List. And if you want to see them, you have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and look at trees. So when I went there, I did look for the loris, but I was also more fascinated by the false vampire bats. These chaps were in a small group in an old ice house that they had left in the arboretums. There had originally been a big country house which got demolished, but the ice house had remained, and they'd always had bats in it. So when I saw these little faces staring down at me, I thought, I need to find out more about you. I like their ears. So basically what have we got here? So they are the lesser false vampire bats, these ones, Megaderma spasma. They are found out throughout Asia. They're not actually that rare. They have 4 genera and 5 species. Its nose leaf has a very long dorsal lobe, stiffened with central rib and convex flaps on the side. So actually, when you take a close-up look of that nose, it's very peculiar. It really is. But they actually have ability to echolocate, and it's the shape of the nose which causes the frequency to be quite high. But it's not shy, and it eats just about anything. So it will enter homes to take geckos. We did witness a gecko being taken, although we can't guarantee it was this species that did it. And they will also eat small mammals. And on some of the research papers I read, it said they'll actually take other bats as well. So on the food system, the last one ate insects, and this one possibly is into cannibalism. Who knows? But these ones don't eat frogs, although one paper did say they might eat frogs and might eat fish, so who knows. The fish-eating bat that I'm really fascinated in and would love to see is Ricketts big-footed bat, and it's Myotis rickettii, but it lives in China, and I've not yet been able to go to China. So that's the false vampire bat. I'd say that's pretty much an omnivore. Okay, so moving on to the Indian flying bat, also in Sri Lanka. These ones are quite famous because you often get them in the big trees around hotels and things, especially where there's a small reservoir of water. That seems to be where we find them. The flying fox, Patroclus medius, it's just had a recent name change. It is one of the largest bats in the world. It can weigh up to about 1.6 kilograms, and it's due to the size and weight, really, that they get eaten as well, because they're about the size of a small rabbit, which is a meal for a family, really. It says nocturnal when you read it. Yeah, nocturnal for feeding. But in reality, if you go under a roost during the day, they are not asleep. They are definitely not asleep. They live in large groups in trees, and they're very sexual bats. They're constantly sort of grooming each other and scent marking each other, and yes, they get up to all sorts of things, including fellatio. They eat fruit and nectar. They don't have the ability to echolocate, but they have a good sense of smell, which helps them find their food. And they can see, obviously, when they fly, but I'm not sure their sight's that wonderful, because I did see quite a lot that had crashed into things. You know, in the following morning, you often did see bats on the ground or caught up in power lines, which was quite sad. I'm just hoping that's not someone messaging me saying we can't hear you. Okay, so moving on. They don't like rain. When it rains, they hide under the tree rather than in the branches of the tree. I just thought this photo was quite spectacular. We'd gone up to a site in Mahoya, right in the centre of Sri Lanka, and I wanted to film this roost anyway, which is the next thing you'll see. And all the little bats were, or big bats were hanging upside down, hiding from the rain. That was quite funny. So moving swiftly on, this is a video that I took of that Mahoya reservoir roost that was in the big tree right next to the reservoir. So I'm stood on the dam and the bats are flying over me. Hopefully it'll play. And that noise is the bats. They were very noisy. So that was quite an interesting evening spent. I have to say, the owner of the guest house I was staying in just thought I was bonkers. They're just like, they're bats. Why are you interested in them? But I thought it was quite an amazing experience. Okay, moving into Europe now, slowly getting further west. I was just going to talk very briefly about Georgia. So Georgia is sort of sandwiched between the Caucasus Mountains to the north and the Lesser Caucasus to the south. It is part of Europe. And now that we've, entered into Brexit, they want our place apparently. So I was doing some work in the Tuishi Gorge, and we think there was probably 16 bat species living in this gorge, either in the mature woodland around the edges or in the caves, adits, blast holes, cracks, all sorts of things, and the houses. All the houses had bats living in them. So we wanted to know what bats were actually living in there. So what's the first thing you do? Well, you walk into the cave and have a look around. We found lots of droppings, so we knew there was bats, but I'm not really an expert on bat droppings, and we stared at these lots and pretended that we thought we knew what they might be, but we didn't. So we collected some samples, ascertained that they were very definitely eating lots of insects, beetles and things like that. We'd find legs and bits of wing cases and stuff like that. So we did what all good consultants do, and stuck out an Anabat. And the Anabat recorded these interesting calls that are just above 90 kilohertz. And we didn't know what they were because they were too high for greater horseshoe and too low for lesser horseshoe, or any of the other bats, the sort of Mediterranean horseshoe, etc. So it was a bit of a moment. What have we got? So we thought, well, we've got some options. We think we know what the recording is, but the best way to do it would be to actually go and catch the bat or find it and identify it in the hand. So with horseshoes, one of the main identifying features is obviously the nose. So here's a picture on the left of one of the bats that we found, and on the right you've got the key for sort of keying it out. So it was quite difficult to do. This bat is the same as the third one down, and it's the double unibrow that is the giveaway. So this is Blasius, Rhinolophus blasii. But I thought he was quite hard to key out, and then when I realised it was down to the double unibrow, it kind of all made a bit more sense. But to be fair on this one, I did have a Croatian bat expert with me, and I learned an awful lot from him. So with the hibernation survey, it was also quite illuminating in itself. So bats go and hibernate and lower their body temperature and therefore their energy requirements through the winter months because their insects or their food is just not available. And so I bought myself a infrared camera thinking this was a great idea. We'd find bats in caves. No, you can't, because when the bats hibernate, they tend to lower their body temperature to the same as ambient. And so the camera didn't actually show up the bats. What we did find was that bats kind of hibernate in a system. So we found that the greater horseshoes and the lesser horseshoes would wrap their wings entirely around themselves and always be hanging in about the first 15 meters of the cave entrance. So they would be from about freezing to about 3 degrees Celsius. Then as we went further into the caves, we would find this one's a Mediterranean bat, Mehi's bat. And this one would hibernate with its wings slightly open, but the ambient temperature where that one was probably about 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. And then even further back in the cave system, we found this wee chap. Note the double unibrow. Yeah, we found him, Mr. Blasius. And he again hibernates with his wings slightly open and seemed to prefer an ambient temperature of about 13 degrees Celsius. In another cave, we found a few more of them. So we were able to completely confirm its presence and confirm, yeah, its call is at 92 kilohertz, which was quite reassuring. And if that wasn't enough, when we were searching around in the guano in the bottom of the cave, we even managed to find ourselves a skull. And because my Croatian bat expert Igor works for a museum, he took the skull bits back to the museum and had the guys look at it, and they actually confirmed it was Blasius as well, which is quite cool. It's very tiny teeth and very doggy teeth, because at the end of the day, it's a carnivore. It eats insects and it has to crunch things up. So moving on, this is a whirlwind tour, still heading west. Next country is Guinea in West Africa, which unfortunately has been in the news the last 2 days because of a very, very recent Ebola outbreak, which I'll come on to in a minute. But absolutely fascinating country. It's incredibly diverse. There's many, many different types of habitats. So you've got dry jungle, rainforest jungle, you've got savanna jungle. So because you've got all those diverse habitats, you get quite a diverse range of species. There's more than 66 species of bat, and I say more than because they're still finding new species. They're definitely not documented, and there's no sonograms for them either. So you can stick an Anabat out or an SM2 or one of these recording devices, and you'll get lots of awesome calls to look at, but it'd be impossible to assign them to a species, which is a real shame. So this is a new species in the photograph that was found in 2018 by Dr. Frick. They were surveying up in the Nimba Mountains, and they were surveying natural caves and tunnels, like the adits that Tina's been surveying for the hibernating bats. Because in Guinea, there's been a long history of mining. Now it's a case of ripping the ground open and all the habitats up. Previously, it was more artisanal mining, so they would just dig an adit into a hillside and then mine underground. And that's what the bats are now colonizing. So they found this one. I think it's absolutely cool. It's bright orange. And they got to name it as well, which is quite nice. We didn't find any new species. So moving on. So if you can't use sonograms, how do you identify bats? Well, the only way to do it really is to actually catch the bats. And you have to use nets or harp traps. Unfortunately, taking a harp trap over there wasn't an option, so we had to go for mist netting. There's no licensing system or anything because it's Africa. But what we did was we took on board 2 experts, inverted commas, and they did the bat work with us to photograph and log the species that we caught. Basically, what we had to do was catch each bat and then measure its forearm and its weight and take photographs of it and then key out and work out which species they were, because even of these three, even after keying them out, we couldn't be completely sure, but we knew we got a Rhinolophus, and we knew we got a Hipposideros as well, or at least two. So it was really, really quite interesting. But the bat that really caught my attention and I thought was absolutely cool was the epilated fruit bat. And this one in particular is Peter's dwarf epilated fruit bat, Micropterus pusillus. And it's a megabat in the family Pteroptidae. Latin never was my strong point. It lives in the natural habitats in subtropical or tropical moist lowland forests and in moist savanna. So we found it in an area which would originally have been jungle, but they cut down an awful lot of the trees, so it was kind of scrub with the odd big tree in it, which did make mist netting quite difficult. It feeds on nectar and fruits, so you think, it's a fruit bat, but actually it's also been recorded eating insects, which is quite interesting as it doesn't echolocate, but it has got really big eyes, and what we think is it's got sufficient vision that at dawn and dusk it can still find moths and larger beetles to eat, presumably because there's quite a lot of protein in them. It is very useful for pollination as well, and because it pollinates crops, it's tolerated. I say tolerated because it is very much a known reservoir for Ebola, which I didn't find out till afterwards. But when we were catching these bats, my God, we had masks on, we had goggles on, we had gloves, we were disinfecting ourselves in between each handling event. It was quite strict protocol, and that was before COVID, but it was because we knew that bats could have Ebola, and this was an Ebola area. So it was really interesting. And the other thing is its little white epaulets in front of its ears can change shape and form. So when the bat's relaxed and not really caring about anything, they look really small. And when it's either sexually aroused or pissed off because somebody's caught it in a net, the white fluff sticks out and it produces a scent. There's a scent gland sat underneath it. So it's quite easy to identify. There are a few different bats with epaulets, but I just thought this one was quite sweet. Made for a nice picture. So I'm going to show you a little video I took, and it's just very, very short. I'll play it twice just in case you can't see it, but it's just us releasing one of the bats. Okay, cool. So heading west again. This is as far west as we get, and then I've probably talked enough. Next place is Argentina. Basically the other side of the world, produces very good wine. So in Argentina, I did meet quite a few different bat species. They've got many, many different ones. Tent making bats, which I thought were cool. They're the only bat species that actually chew a leaf to make themselves a home. So most bats obviously squeeze in crevices or hang off trees. These ones actually make work to make themselves a sort of nest, as it were. But the ones that fascinated me the most were the vampire bats. So this is a common vampire bat. There's Modus rotundus. It feeds entirely on blood. I think it's the only bat to do this. I think it's the only mammal species to feed entirely on blood as well. There is a finch, a bird species that feeds on blood, but this one's quite cool. I think I'm going to show you a video in a moment. It lives in houses and in caves. And sometimes they'll have groups for 10 to 100 of them. Occasionally it'll have over 1,000. It generally feeds on horses and cattle, but it can feed on other things too, dogs, occasionally humans, anything that's warm and easily accessible and full of blood, essentially. And what it does is it will fly around. It can sense infrared. It's got a slightly different sense to other bats. And then it'll hone in on the infrared, i.e. the warmth. And there are some studies that say it can detect pulsing blood, so it knows when there is a vein or whatever close to the surface. it then lands on the ground, it runs along the ground, and then it'll get to the heel or the ankle of the cow or the horse, and then it'll just bite it. And when it bites it, not only does its saliva contain a sort of anticoagulant to keep the blood flowing, it also contains an anesthetic. So as long as it can get that first bite in and a couple of licks, then the animal it's feeding off can't feel it. And it'll feed for between sort of 15 and 20 minutes, and it will drink about half its body weight a night in blood in order to exist. So it's quite an interesting one, and you can tell by the shape of its face, it's really adapted for this. It's got those big thick lips that can create a seal and lick using its tongue. It doesn't need to echolocate, so it doesn't have to have the leaf-shaped nose or a big squish nose or anything. And it's, yeah, quite an interesting bat. I'll show you this next video. There's sound on it. Hopefully it'll play. Even if the picture doesn't, hopefully the sound will. It was produced by the BBC. And basically, they went down to a sea lion colony, to see if the vampire bats were feeding on the sea lions. And these are the results. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. Definitely something different. I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. So that's my brief run around the planet, looking at a few bat species that have made a bit of an impression on me, either because I couldn't identify them, or they had weird diets, or they looked huge and cool. So what we've done is we've looked at bats, which eat beetles and insects, lizards, frogs, and other bats, such as the false vampire bat, fruit and nectar. So we've looked at the epilated fruit bat, the flying fox, and also blood, the vampire bats. Such an adaptable mammal group. I have yet to find the one that eats fish. I don't know why, but that just totally fascinates me. So, thank you everyone for listening, and any questions? I've actually no idea if anyone's still there. I'm just talked to a blank screen for about 35 minutes.
Oh, thanks, Nick. That was brilliant. Really good. Are you able to put the video links onto the website? Because I don't know about anyone else. I could see them, but there wasn't any sound on them for me.
Oh no! The whole bit was about the sounds. Okay. Okay, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions? I don't know if I can answer them, but
Nobody's put anything in. Oh, there's one just come up in the chat. I'll read it out because it's hi folks, I've got no microphone, so I'm just listening. Years ago, I saw what I estimated must have been towards 1 meter blackbird-sized bats heading out
1
over.
million, I reckon.
Yeah, that would make more sense. Blackbird-sized bats heading out over Entebbe Airport in Uganda towards Lake Victoria. Do you know what they would have been?
Could have been fruit bats. It's exactly what they would do early evening, especially heading at, well, the shores of the lake are where all the cultivated land is, and a lot of the crops will be. So if they've got bananas or mango or anything like that, that will be what the fruit bats are heading towards. It's quite spectacular watching it. I mean, that colony I looked at must have had upwards of 40,000 bats flying out of it. It's a shame you couldn't hear the noise. It was quite definite.
Something to look forward to when it's up on the website.
Yeah. I bet. That sounds like fruit bats.
Yeah, I mean, horizon to horizon for over an hour, that's a phenomenal amount of bats. It would be just amazing to see, wouldn't it? So when you were releasing the bat in Guinea, do you know what species that was, or even what genus? I know it's not always easy.
That one you saw me releasing was, I always pronounce it badly, but a Hypsilodorus bat, because it had a round, flat nose rather than a normal one like you have with the lesser horseshoe and the greater horseshoe.
Oh, okay. I don't know how you tell those two apart, just on nose leaf.
The guy keyed it out is Hypsilodorus ridleyi, but it can't have been because that species doesn't occur in Africa. So
well, that we know about.
No, so it just kind of goes to show how potentially it had the same sort of biometrics, but it's a different continent away. So I've had to put it down as genus, but not species.
Yeah, there's a lot we don't know about bats, which is one of the reasons they're so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And seeing what they eat and their sort of strategies for staying alive and things is always quite interesting. And some don't mind being communal, and others like being solitary.
Which doesn't always seem to be related to their prey choice either, does it?
No.
Because you get all
just love being in big groups, but that's because they're just far too sexual for their own good.
But then you get those huge freetail roosts of various different sorts of freetails, and they're insectivorous, so they're actually, because they're roosting communally, they're having to cover, you know, really big area each night to get enough food, insect food, to feed the whole colony. I think that's quite fascinating that they choose to stay together rather than into smaller roosts, more spread out through the countryside.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because some of the ones in Texas, that was absolutely ginormous.
Yeah, I'd love to go and see those. That would be phenomenal.
Great, yeah, because isn't there a road bridge that was quite famous for the huge roost that it had? And then when they had all the floods about 2 years ago, somebody went under there in the boat and was literally just collecting the bats,
Yeah.
warm them up, dry them out, and put them back.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I picked up in Australia, watching the fruit bats there, is that you can identify where they are first by the smell.
Yeah, they do stink. Yeah, I'll go with that. I mean, I learned about fruit bats the hard way. The first time I went to Africa, I decided it'd be a really good idea to pitch my tent under a large tree to keep the sun on my head so that it wouldn't get too hot. And I got into bed that night having had a bit of the local brew. God knows what it was, but I don't really remember getting into bed. Anyway, I had a dream it was raining all night. I woke up the next morning, got out my tent, and it looked like someone had literally been tipping jars of jam over it. And it was basically the fruit bats had foraged all night. God knows what they'd been eating. And then obviously, like most bats, they empty themselves before they go into roost. And they emptied themselves over my tent. So now I look up before I pitch my tent. Cool. Well, if there's no more questions, I shall sign off, go home and have a large glass of wine.
In that case, I'd like to say thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting.
No
Yes.
problem
It was
at all.
lovely to see the
So
videos.
the next one is bat parasites. You should have got an invite if you've already asked to join. If you haven't yet asked to join, just drop me an email and I'll stick you on the distribution list.
And before you go, Nick, there's another question just come in for you. How did you get into international ecology or ecology in general?
Long story. International ecology. I had been a UK-based ecologist for about 8 years, and I had my annual appraisal, and I said, I'm bored. I'm going to go and work for women's rights in a UN camp in Syria. And my boss said, don't do that. Just think about something you could do that will interest you. And I said, well, I love international travel and I love biodiversity. He said, well, make it happen. And so I got in touch with various people that did this kind of work, worked out how to get into it, and then put a business case together, and said, right, what I need to do is get in touch with international lending organizations like World Bank and things, find out what projects they've got and see how I could benefit them. And yeah, it's gone full circle now. I'm recruiting to bring people into the business, and I work with a team based in Grenoble, and we've got social, hydrology, biodiversity, and various other disciplines, and we all work solely on international projects now. So it's quite good. I enjoy it. It keeps me busy, except at the moment I've been in the UK for almost 12 months. That's never happened for a long time.
Yeah, it's not like you.
My hair's gone brown. It's not blonde anymore.
Okay, and I'll just put a quick plug in for the Durham Bat Group talk next Tuesday as well, and Nick did send an email around. That one's to get in touch with Alistair Lockett, but that was in the email that Nick sent out last weekend, was it, Nick? Possibly? Yeah, so that's probably worth listening to as well. Certainly anyone who knows me knows that I mostly spend winters poking around in any structure I can get in, so it's been quite difficult this winter not doing that. So it'll be really interesting to find out what somebody else has been up to in a different part of the north.
Definitely, yeah. It's not travelling. I've not been anywhere that I can't walk to from either the office or my home, and there's no addict within walking distance.
Can't go in anyway. You know, it's that sort of the mine community advising people not to go underground, and also with the risk of bats and COVID, you just wouldn't want to be doing that. But it has been a very different winter from my point of view, rather than leading gangs of willing volunteers in the snow in Denthead. But next year, hopefully. Yeah.
You realise how much you miss it.
Yes.
Excellent. Right.
Thank you, Nick. That was really good.
No problem. Speak to you all soon. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.